Sony, I mean, sometimes you just make lenses and I look at this and I'm like, who is this for? Hello everyone, my name is Josh Diaz, and today we're talking about a new lens released by Sony, the Sony FE 24-50 zoom lens f2.8G. So this is an interesting lens because on the surface, there's nothing really like it. The 24-50 2.8G exists in a world where the 24-70 still is an incredibly popular focal length, both in f4 and f2.8. Now these are incredibly popular lenses because they go from wide to medium to telephoto in focal length all in one lens. And of course, if you want the best performance, you're going to get that 2.8 aperture. So Sony has released essentially half that, the 24-50, which is kind of a controversial focal length. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the specifications of this new lens. First of all, this new lens is a G lens, which is a great quality of lens, but doesn't represent their top quality offerings, which is the GM. Now, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong here, because Sony has released a lot of lenses, but I believe this is Sony's first 2.8 zoom lens that is a G lens, not specifically a G master lens. It only weighs 440 grams, which is very, very light. The lens is also less than 4 inches long, making it great to throw in a travel bag, and overall very, very easy to carry. The lens has a 67mm filter thread, which is the same as the smaller prime G masters, so you can use the same size filters. The lens also has 2 linear motors for autofocusing, which is not the same as the 4XD linear motors present on the G Master lenses, so you're going to get less capable autofocus performance out of this lens, but Sony already has incredible autofocus, as do many of the camera brands out there, so 2 linear motors on a small compact lens like this, I don't see you having any problems. The aperture ring on the back of the lens is a nice touch, and again, something often reserved for G Master lenses. The reviews coming in from the major camera channels have mostly been positive about this lens's performance. This lens, like many other Sony lenses, especially recent releases, seems to be a performant and quality offering in their already expansive E-mount lens system. There are many, many lenses to choose from in this system. Because of its size and price, it's positioned uniquely to pair with those C-body cameras that are coming out, the smaller of the mirrorless full-frame cameras. It seems tailor-made to those. But don't be dissuaded if you wanted to put this on a standard alpha-size body. It will work as well. And if it's a focal length that you like, all the better for it. Speaking of the focal length, let's talk about how strange this is. A 24-50. Now, you don't see this very often. It's still a highly usable focal length. You can get wides, and on the 50 you can still get good portraits. And it all depends if you want to give up that top end of the 24-70. I mean, you get 2.8 and you get the small size. This is a great looking travel lens on paper. Now let's talk about the price really quickly. This lens is too expensive. In my opinion, it's too expensive. This is just my opinion. This lens is a hair under $1,100 US. There's no real way around it. The price is too high. In my opinion, the price of this lens is too high to make it a compelling option versus the current competitors in the marketplace. Let's start with Sony. So within Sony's ecosystem, you have a couple different competitors, some more competitive than others. Let's start with the 24-70 G Master 2. This lens, I don't believe, is a competitor to the 24-50. The G Master 24-70 Mark II comes in at a little under $2,300 USD, but for that price, you're getting a lot more lens. You're getting that extra focal length, you're getting 4 times the autofocus capability and those XD linear motors. You're also getting the superior optical quality, formula. There's a ton of features that make this a much better lens, and the reason that this is the common choice by professionals. But even if you go down the stack for Sony, maybe you go to something like the Sony 24-105 f4, a very popular lens for run and gun. This is an incredibly versatile lens that on paper is only $200 more than the 24-50. And for that price, you get so much more reach, going from 50 to 105 in millimeters. You get optical stabilization, which is going to help you. Even though you get less light being an f4, you get the stabilization, so maybe you can go down a bit in shutter speed for photography. For video, you get smoother video. It's just that simple. They're both G lenses, so they'll both be built in a similar way. And you know what? On the 24-50, you get that aperture ring. It kind of goes back and forth, but you can't deny that the 24-105 is a much more versatile lens at barely more money. So that's within Sony's own offerings. Now let's look at some third-party brands. Sigma offers an incredibly popular, I dare say legendary at this point, 24-70 f2.8 that is basically the same price as this 24-50. That lens carries forward that constant aperture through the entire 24-70 range. It's built great. The optical formula is amazing, and a lot of people rely on that lens for professional work. But what I will say is that lens is heavy. Now let's talk about what I think is the obvious choice in this range, and a lens that I don't think the Sony can beat. It's the Tamron 28-75 f2.8 constant aperture zoom lens. This lens is almost as wide on the back end. It goes all the way to 70. It maintains the 2.8. And here's the kicker, it's almost as light. It's only 100 grams heavier. Now sure, it's a bit longer, but in terms of overall performance, this lens, in terms of functionality, blows the 24-50 out of the water. You only really need the 24-50 if you need that small kind of form factor that would fit well in a bag, and even so, the Tamron is not a big lens. And that's not even as bad as it gets for the Sony, because Tamron has another lens which I don't see people talking about very much in the media, and that's the Tamron 20-40 f2.8. A lot of people forget about this lens, but it covers a very close focal length to the 24-50. It has an f2.8 constant aperture, so they're square there. But what this lens has is it has the weight advantage, it's lighter, it has a very similar size, and most importantly, it's much cheaper at less than $700 USD. For a very similar feature set, there's really no reason to go with the 24-50 if you're looking for this type of focal length. Now, 24-50, 20-40, not exactly the same, but the features are very similar, and the Tamron is almost half the price. And that kind of brings me to discussing the philosophy of Sony. Obviously, as a Sony shooter, I like a lot about what they do. That's why I made the decision to invest in the Sony ecosystem. But as the months and years go on, I find myself wishing that Sony would be more creative in their innovation, kind of like Canon has been doing. Over the years, Canon has come out with a couple really unique lenses that I could genuinely see a use case for. They came out with that crazy 28-70 f2 zoom, which I think is a great choice for a lot of professionals. They recently came out with a 24-105 constant f2.8 aperture zoom lens, which turned the industry on its head, thinking that you could not get that much zoom at that constant focal length, yet they did. Canon is pushing the envelope in terms of what lenses can be technically, and here we find Sony just kind of rehashing some older ideas of what the ideal focal length in a zoom lens can be. And to me, as a professional shooter, that's not interesting. But even as a hobbyist shooter, if I put my mind into, what am I going to put my money into if I just had one lens, or I could only buy a small amount of lenses, this isn't it in a lot of scenarios. This lens is very, very niche, and I can't recommend it for most people. And the sad thing is, on paper, it looks great. Like, it looks like a great little compact zoom. Getting the 2.8 aperture into the hands of G-shooting photographers is great. I admire Sony for kind of bringing that into that ecosystem. But, the competition, especially in the third party, is much too steep. Much too steep to be spending this money on this lens. In my opinion, this lens should be about $699. It should be about the price of the Tamron, maybe a bit more. I know Sony's never going to come down to that, but honestly, that's kind of what it looks like it needs to be at for this lens to be popular. On paper, this lens does have the making to be a decent lens within the E-mount ecosystem. I can imagine a lot of people being happy with their purchase, but if you are someone who's evaluating this lens for your camera setup, I would encourage you to look natively at Sony's other glass, but also there's a lot of compelling third-party options that could, for a lot of people, render the launch of this new 24-50 2.8G lens just irrelevant upon arrival. So that's my opinion on this new lens from Sony. What do you think about this release? Do you think Sony should be prioritizing the release of any other lenses, any other focal lengths that are coming out? Personally, I hope we see an 85 f1.2 soon. I know that's an incredibly expensive and performant lens that a lot of people won't get to shoot on, but I think it's long overdue. I think we need a stupidly powerful portrait lens in this ecosystem. That's what I would like to see next. But what would you like to see next? And how do you feel about this lens release from Sony? Of course, leave your comments down below. I read every single one. Thank you very, very much for watching. I'll have some more videos coming up soon. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next video.